If you are a fan of 80s action movies, then definitely check out the Kickstarter campaign for my first feature-length documentary, In Search of the Last Action Heroes. The film charts the rise and fall of the 1980s action movie genre. We'll reveal behind-the-scenes footage, exclusive insights and uncover stories never told before by the people behind one of the most iconic eras in cinema. We can only make this project happen with your support, so come and join me on this adventure back in time. Check out the link to our Kickstarter page and discover exclusive limited edition rewards in the description below.
Okay guys, well welcome to this roundtable discussion of the action-filled tropes that we all know and love. I'm Tai Singh. I'm going to be hosting this roundtable discussion. I'm the founder of the Bristol Bad Film Club and author of the upcoming book Born to be Bad, talking to the greatest action villains in talking to the greatest villains in action cinema. I can't even get the title of my own book right. I thought before we dive into some of our favorite tropes of action films, we could just go around the table and introduce ourselves, give a little bit of background about our YouTube channels. So I thought first up, Rossatron, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you very much. So I run Rossatron, and it's a, video essay channel, which is kind of a term I'm not a super big fan of, but anyway, talking about action films pretty much. Sometimes other stuff, but generally just looking at the biggest of action cinema, which strangely has probably the least amount of video essay stuff looking at it, even though they're arguably the most technical side of things. So that's what I do.
Cool. Mr. H?
Yeah, hi. I don't know really. My YouTube channel kind of started as anything and everything. I just talk about what I enjoy, and has recently moved into interviewing people and attending press screenings for things, which is a wild ride in and unto itself. So, yeah, just what I like, basically. That's literally it.
Cool. Ryan?
Hi, I'm Ryan, and I genuinely don't know how I got here. So I yeah, like Rossatron, yeah, people would call what I do video essays, even though I kind of dispute the term myself. I kind of just blabber about films that I find interesting and sort of try to be more personal and reflective in that sense, mostly focusing on horror-related content, because that seems to be the bizarre stuff that I'm into. That's about it, really.
And finally, Oliver.
Hello, yes, my name's Oliver Harper. I produce retrospective reviews on 80s and 90s movies. So I cover, of course, you cover a movie and I cover the visual effects of a film, the soundtrack, the video games, if there was any available, and sort of give my own critique on it and open and end each retrospective with the trailer as well. So it's kind of everything about that one movie is kind of put into one big package. And I've been doing that since late 2011.
So, in full transparency, I am one of the writer-producers on Oliver's forthcoming documentary film, In Search of the Last Action Heroes. But that just means that, like all of you, I love 80s action films. So what I thought we could do is look at the most popular aspects, some might call them cliches of the action genre, and then we could go around the table and kind of discuss what our favorite of those are. So I thought we'd kick off with action heroes themselves, our favorite action actors, and in your opinion, what makes a true action star? Is it someone like Jackie Chan who can do all their own fight scenes and their own stunts? Is it charisma like Bruce Willis used to have? Or is it someone like Arnie who is just a massive man mountain? So Ryan, what's your take? What do you think makes a great action star?
So like generally, like my feelings about it is that there's sort of, at least in the 80s, there was kind of like a balance between those sort of like pseudo bravado fantasy meets some form of like humanity and something that's kind of relatable. I was kind of debating this with myself as to like who would be I would consider a great action star, and the one that always comes to mind to me personally is Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, I think in the Alien films. Purely because there's sort of like it's not just so much this whole like badassery that everybody like pop culture seems to sort of paint on characters in the 80s, but there's sort of like an integral like relatability, and there's even a sense of weakness to her that's kind of overcome gradually. I mean, I think the transition from when Ridley Scott did Alien to when James Cameron did Aliens, and like putting her from a horror context into an action context, I feel like it justifies her growth in like a very deep narrative context, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's where I would start.
Oliver, what do you reckon? What do you think makes a great action star?
Well, usually the key is charisma, I think. With all these action stars we've had, like Arnold and Dolph and Van Damme, there's always one little element that kind of sells them to the audience. I mean, you could say, I mean, Arnold's like, you know, the best kind of action star, but for me, it's always, I look at like Kurt Russell as Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China, where he thinks he's the hero and he's an absolute bozo, but extremely likable. But he knows his limitations. He kind of figures them out, and I think by the end he kind of realizes his skill set. So, but there's so many different combinations of what could make the sort of the best action star. But it's with Van Damme. You know, most action stars, they always had a limitation with their acting ability, but there's always something about their physique or their martial arts skills that ends up selling them. But yeah, I'd probably say Jack Burton's probably the one. Even though he doesn't have any martial arts skills, he's just Kurt Russell with a wicked mullet and attitude.
Mr. H, where do you stand?
Well, I mean, I was debating this when I kind of received the questions, and I think both of you have really valid points, in fact. And my character, well, one of my picks would be similar to Ryan's, but it would be Kurt Russell in The Thing. Not typically someone you would look at and go, oh, it's an action hero, but someone who progresses through the film, you know, in that kind of way and has somewhat of a development. But then I also second Oliver with, you know, the likes of charisma and Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's undeniable, but it's more linked specifically to the 80s. You know, when you think about the 80s and you think about 80s action, it is those people which, you know, had the overblown personas and that kind of cheesy charisma. Those are the people who, generally speaking, would instantly come to mind. So I guess a blend, Arnold Schwarzenegger plus, you know, a little bit more of a subdued action hero like Kurt Russell in The Thing.
And Rossatron, what for you springs to mind when you think of your typical 80s action heroes?
Well, I mean, again, like I'm following a lot of the points I agree with, but I guess one of the things I always found interesting with these actors that come to mind, even starting with someone like Sigourney Weaver, and then you go to Bruce Willis or even Schwarzenegger, arguably in a way, is that they're known for these big dumb action movies, but they all started in very serious stuff, pretty serious stuff. Like even Conan or something like that was still like dark high fantasy. And, you know, Stallone came from the Rocky films and was Oscar nominated. And then Rambo was this small, intimate kind of thriller. And Alien is this really high class horror movie. And they were sort of proven people before they took on the more arguably dumb look, because they sort of, in a way, they have that charisma, but they know themselves. You know, it's that knowing sense that they took on, you know, knowing what people find funny, kind of what The Rock does now, probably a little bit more, where they just really knew what audiences wanted to see, which was nothing they had to think about too much, even though they were very capable of actors, of being able to make people think a lot and do things that were a bit deeper. But they sort of cottoned on to this very simple idea. And that, for me, is what it is just knowing that the people on the set look like they're having fun in these movies, look like they're enjoying themselves, and they never went too far, which kind of encapsulates a lot of the 80s action stuff, which the 90s obviously changed a bit and went a lot more serious and kind of crime drama-esque.
Yeah,
so that would be it for me.
Okay, those are some really great points. So I think what we've got here is a kind of a mixture of the charisma and the people who are out of their depth and have that kind of emotional depth, like Sigourney and Kurt Russell, to see you through. But another big element of the action films is, of course, the action itself, whether it's the car chases, the explosions, or the stunts. So if we start with you, Rossatron, this time. What is the definitive 80s action scene that comes to mind? Is it like the tanker chase in Terminator 2? Is it Bill Duke picking up the chain gun in Predator and leveling half a forest?
Well, if we're talking about 80s films, I'm going to go for Terminator 1. And say, for me, Tech Noir, the gunfight, Just in terms of, we're talking both 80s iconography and also just pure filmmaking quality and the excitement and what it means to it. And honestly, I'm going to talk about Terminator 1 a lot because it's like my favorite film of all time. But just what Cameron did with that in terms of even just using music and like what the song choice meant. I can't burning on in the third degree and like what that means for the character and stuff, and then how it blends into this very thumping score and the fact that it's called tech noir and the neon, and it was almost like he knew what would become very 80s, but he was in the 80s, sort of like Back to the Future in that way, like choosing things specifically of the time that would age very quickly, but also appear very retro. It was just incredibly well, and the scene is just so brilliantly well done and thrilling and gripping that I just love it.
Cool. I completely agree. The Terminator is personally one of my favorite films, and I prefer it to Terminator 2, even though it's great in its own right. But Mr. H, where do you stand?
Well, you'll probably hear me bleed on about Predator quite a lot in this, but it's actually the scene where they all go into the guerrilla camp, and just when Arnold picks up the motor, which is being used as a generator or something along those lines. That whole scene, how it's choreographed, everything. It's just so good. It's got everything you could need. Cheese, just brutal masculinity, but to again, an ultimate cheesy level. It's just fantastic. I absolutely love that. It's definitive for me.
Okay, and Oliver, what do you reckon?
See, I could do an easy one and just say the ending of Commando, but because that is like whenever you think of that sort of classic 80s thing, you just think of one guy with with the biggest guns with endless ammo, just taking on every guy without being hurt. So I don't know. That's probably one of the most iconic kind of things that always popped into my head. But I'm gonna have to be really repeat myself again with like Big Trouble in Little China, because it was seeing that sort of the back alley fight scene when you got the two guys kind of chase, they face each other off, the two factions, and they charge in and fight. And it's like at the time seeing that, because that was like 86, that was, so seeing that kind of Hong Kong cinema style thrown into US theatrical movie was a big surprise to most people. And then you've got the three storms turn up and it's out of the blue. I mean, it's always amazing visual effects. So, and it doesn't involve any guns, only a little bit near the beginning. So seeing that all happen, is always kind of stuck in my mind as a kid. And I'd probably say that. But I mean, I would, if pushed, I would probably say Commando at the end, even though it's more comical than say the stuff in Predator, because Predator's like, as other guys said, was like it's far that stuff's far more polished, where Commando's a little bit more loose around the edges, but it's I think it gets the points for just being so over the top.
So far we have essentially a triple hat trick for the Austrian Oak. Ryan, are you going to make it a full house?
Literally all of them that are mentioned are the ones that were kind of always coming to mind to me. You see, so it's interesting when Ross brought up the tech noir scene from the Terminator. That was the one that I wanted to point out, because see, when I thought of Commando, because that is, I think, sort of the go-to answer, because it is the definitive. I feel like it is sort of that definitive cheesy spectacle of the 80s, where it's like the hero can't be harmed, he's somehow invincible, and he's able to never run out of ammo. It's a video game effectively, but it's interesting. I watched that, and I think it was a few years later than when Predator came out, and I've always perceived Predator, I think like kind of quite a few people, is that it's more of, I felt like it was a satire of what Arnie's films really were. And there's a scene, the scene where in Predator where they're like, where the guy picks up the minigun and they just literally mow down a forest of nothing because they think they see it. I felt like that entire thing was a whole play on how that invincibility is now kind of being dismantled for them, because the scene that the Predator opens to, where they are basically attacking this the whole the army base or the guerrilla camp and whatnot, and then they're just invincible, lobbing grenades, and they're like pinpoint accuracy, and they just walk out with not a sweat on them, with their with the flex in their muscles. And then Predator comes in and kind of says, "Well, I'll prove you all wrong here," and it kind of dismantles what they're sort of that sort of bravado, macho, unstoppable action hero. But the thing about the tech noir scene in Terminator was like I think as you're saying, Ty, about I view Terminator as superior to Terminator 2 purely from the point of view of Terminator feels like almost like a borderline horror movie at times with the action feels there's a weight to it. There's a sense of like there's a sense of urgency and like there's an impact to it in that everything's abrupt. There's like an intimacy to it. There's a sense of like this has consequences. It feels like there's it creates an unpredictability. It creates some sort of realism. And I think when you see the scene where Arnie's Terminator is just determined to get Sarah Connor, and it's his expression and all, I feel sells that sort of like this guy has an agenda, and it really just adds an intensity that, you know, it doesn't feel soft, it doesn't feel toned down. It feels that every death matters, every bullet matters, everything that happens from here on out is going to matter in the long term.
Absolutely. Plus the civilians getting caught in the crossfire
exactly.
as well. But from the weight of those scenes to the levity, I feel this might be another Arnie Strong round. The one-liners, the iconic one-liners as the hero finishes off the bad guy or the big henchman or gets himself out of that last-minute clinch. Let's go around the table. What are your favorite action hero one-liners? Or they could be delivered by the villain. Diplomatic immunity is on the table, gentlemen. Let's start with Oliver.
See, I was going to say let off some steam, Bennett, but I think Go in Pieces, asshole, with Dark Angel, where Dolph Lundgren shoots a guy at the end and he just says, "Go in peace, asshole," and it all explodes. I thought that is brilliant. That's, you know, pure Dolph as well, so I'm going with that.
So Dark Angel, that's a black sheep. I wasn't expecting some Dolph Lundgren action. Ryan, what about you?
Debating this one still. I'm gonna go with the one from Scarface, which is "Say Hello to My Little Friend." It's clean, simple. It's symbolic of everything he's went through. That's me trying to be as profound as possible with my answer, because I'm not as familiar with one-liners.
Okay, no problem. Rossatron?
I was debating this hard, but I think for me, it's got to be Roddy Piper, and I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum, because I just love that film. Even though I think it deconstructs a lot of the 80s stuff, and like it also is so perfectly encapsulated, and I just love that line.
Yeah, that is a man who was gone too soon. Mr. H, your favorite action movie one-liner?
I think, again, I was debating this, and you almost had me when you were saying it's going to be another round to the Austrian oak, but one which I think would sum up 80s action films on a whole would be Jesse Ventura, "I Ain't Got Time to Bleed."
Good one.
Because it's bravado, it's cheese, it's funny, but it just plays into everything that, you know, the film was about, and it, again, just encapsulates 80s action films for me. I think it has everything in that one line.
Absolutely. Speaking about Predator, we've got a new Predator film coming out this year. Hollywood loves a franchise. Often they can flog them to death. Some might say a lot of our favorite franchises have gone on for far too long, whether it's the Terminator, Lethal Weapon, Aliens, Predator, and some should be put out to pasture. So for you guys, which franchise do you feel has gone on too long or went on too long and should have probably been wrapped up after maybe 2 or 3? Starting with Mr. H.
Oh, Christ. Well, I mean, you got two that would work very nicely on there would be Alien, because they've just descended into chaos, but then also Terminator. I mean, we're looking at the 6th Terminator film coming out, which is doing what everything is, well, it's moving into what movie theaters are doing. Well, you know, movie as a industry is doing nowadays. Is we're not doing reboots. We're just going, forget everything else happened. This one leaves off from what you did enjoy. So it's a good one. It's a good one. It's not a reboot. This is going to be a good one. So Alien or Terminator, and I really hate to say that, but if you're thinking about the quantity that has been put into those franchises and the good versus the bad, it's Alien and Terminator, not Predator. Sorry, it'll be those two, unfortunately.
Rossatron, do you agree Alien and Terminator have been letting down the side?
Oh, I mean, yeah, 100%. Terminator should have stopped after 2. Liked a bit of Terminator 3. I actually, just to throw another one in, although I think this might be semi-controversial, is Rambo. I don't think I don't really like Rambo 2 that much, or First Blood Part 2, whatever. And I think Rambo 3 is terrible. But I kind of liked Rambo 4 in a way. So I'm not sure, but now I hear that Rambo 5 is happening, and I'm just like, oh, it just feels too much. Like Stallone, seeing him as like an old man patient in Creed was brilliant. That makes sense to me. But then going back to do another Rambo film after 4 kind of ended it well just seems like too much to me.
And by all accounts, he's taking on Mexican drug gangs, which just sounds like Donald Trump's wet dream incorporated into a movie. I expect better from you, Stallone.
It's just Sicario.
Yeah. Ryan, what do you think? Are there any franchises that...
Yeah, I agree exactly with that. I have this kind of the really aggressive response to the whole Rambo thing, is that I don't think Rambo has any right to be the action figure that everyone seems to make him out to be. So it actually was only quite recently did I actually see any of the Rambo films, because I have friends who are like really into them, and I will say I have not actually seen a Rocky film before either. So
trouble, Ryan.
It's like when you hear so much about it, you kind of have that sort of spitefulness where it's like, I kind of now refuse to watch it just so I feel like they all went out. So I don't want to be like some sort of contrarian asshole about it. But I actually read David Morrell's book, First Blood, before I'd ever seen any of the films. And so I'd only knew Rambo as what the sequels had made him out to be. And the thing about the first one is that it kind of, like, to be fair, it waters down what the book is, whereas the book is more morally grey. It's all about kind of post-traumatic stress disorder and sort of the reaction to a Vietnam veteran, and sort of never judge a book by its cover was actually the literal theme of it. And when I watched First Blood, I was surprised how subdued it was. It was action thriller. It never felt like, I never got the whole the image that again, like the sort of the pop culture image where he's like, running around with a machete and an RPG blowing up camps and stuff like that. It felt like a guy who was very disturbed, someone who was very, very troubled and has gone through the stresses of war and stuff. And that, I think it kind of caught me off guard, because I thought that the movies had butchered the book that much, but I felt like the first film had kind of got that. But then all the sequels that followed just felt like they completely missed the point and wanted to make him into this Hollywood's version of a character that is, to be fair, been done to death.
To be. Exactly, yeah. I think the character of John Rambo was meant to commit suicide at the end of the first film. They really dragged it out.
Yeah, he's not meant to be this romanticized troubled hero. He is supposed to be just like a really, really broken. Like I was thinking, like he's very heavily bearded in the book as well, and you don't see much of his. It doesn't give you a lot of description on his face, so it's just weird when you read the book. It just changed my going in with that mindset. Then seeing the films, it's sort of, I had a very skewed perception on this series.
Yeah, and Oliver, What do you think? Which franchise do you think should have ended a long time ago?
Well, I share that the views of the other guys, but with Terminator and what was the other one? Aliens as well. But if you look back at during the 80s and into the early 90s, I think one series that always stood out to me was Death Wish, because they made 5 of them, right? So you had this one movie that was successful in the 70s, and they did Canon Films got the rights and did Death Wish 2, 3, and 4, and they just, number 2 was this horrible, mean, nasty movie, and number 3 just was comical. Where it's one of the best guilty pleasures. Death Wish 3, we've seen a bunch of this old pensioner just taking out hooligans, and then he does 4 and 5, and he's just like getting so old by that point. It's just like an OAP on the rampage, and it was just laughable. And it was obviously when Canon went bust and Menachem bought had his own company, 21st Century Films, and did Death Wish 5, and it was just like, by that point it was just really milking it to the death, and it obviously bombed. I think most of them kind of didn't do very well. I think Death Wish 2 and 3 did okay, but 4 and 5 were embarrassing. But yeah, I would say Death Wish series was kind of the ones where they milked it back in the past, but I think over time it's become evident that really the Rambos and the Terminators and the Aliens have all kind of gone on, because we all go see them anyway because we're all hoping for that next one movie to be amazing. And we are going to be like with Terminator. When the next one comes out, we were saying to ourselves, "Oh, James Cameron's involved. It's going to be amazing." It's like, no. It was James Cameron who was saying, "Oh, there's no more after Terminator 2, whatever." He said these ones are not canon, whatever. These ones aren't part of the, the series. Even though he goes out there and says, "Oh, Terminator 3 is good and Genesis is good because he's friends with Arnold."
How could he lie to us like that?
Well, he's not going to insult his friend, is it? Because it's like Spielberg. He won't say anything bad against Lucas because they're friends. You know what I mean? You wouldn't go out there and do it publicly. So as the other guys, I agree with them wholeheartedly. But looking back, I'd probably say Death Wish.
Fair enough. Another classic trope of the action genre is the ridiculous names that our heroes are called, whether it's Marion Cobra Cabretti in Cobra, Storm Mason, whatever generic Steven Seagal character that was. I think Chuck Norris is a character called Frank Shatter at some point. So let's go around the table. The most ridiculous action hero names that you either just love or it's like that they went too far. They went too far with John Spartan, for example. So let's start with you, Ryan. Best action hero name.
Okay, kind of like the one-liners. Like I'm always trying to find the more subtle one because I just kind of like how satisfying it is to say Axel Foley from Beverly Hills Cop. Just because it kind of
Axel Foley.
Yeah, it just sort of like fit it again. So that film was nominated, I think, for original screenplay at the Oscars, wasn't it? And it just sort of fits his character. It just describes his character in a nutshell. It's like there's some sort of like witty smartassness to it, could you say? Yeah. It just kind of like rolls off the tongue in a way. So I'm gonna kind of go with that one.
Axel Foley for Ryan. Oliver, what about you?
I'm going with John Matrix because it makes me laugh when you just if that guy's passport has Mr. Matrix, and I just that's the best. I would happily change my name to surname to Matrix. That'd be fun. Or change the first name to Axel Matrix. That'd be amazing. That'd be great.
It's the most manliest name of all time. Mr. H, what do you reckon?
I like the kind of comical factor of Dutch Schaefer, a man with a very clear, thick Austrian accent, being called Dutch. I think that's just hilarious. So yeah, Dutch Schaefer, I love it.
And Rossatron.
Well, I'm shocked we've gotten this far and no one has said Snake Plissken.
No, I have it here, but I was hoping someone else would say.
That is just the best name. I mean, it's awful in a way, but it's so fucking good. And that character in that movie, it just works so brilliantly.
It does.
Brilliant. Okay, so along with a ridiculous action hero name, you often have a ridiculous action film where credibility is pushed to the limits. I mean, for me, Commando generally comes to mind when you think about credibility being pushed to the limits. But what do you guys think? Starting with Rossatron.
Oh, man. I could go big and say The Running Man.
I thought you were going to say Big, the Tom Hanks film, and that is very believable.
I saw a different version of that. I think, well, yeah, I'm going to go with The Running Man just because if you've read the book, they took it so far over what that book is and this kind of more subversive dystopian idea into which the film is, but also just the color and the various villains that come out and the implements they use and the weird friggin' tracksuit things that they wear. And the fact that it's Schwarzenegger at his most, but it's based on a Stephen King book, that to me is ridiculous that you can say Schwarzenegger led a Stephen King adaptation, but it exists. So I'm going to say that.
Mr. H, which film pushes the strains of credibility for you?
Well, from its inception, it would actually be Predator because it started out as a joke, a complete joke of who Rocky would fight next, E.T., and the whole thing was a complete joke. So I think that encapsulates, the worst credibility for a film ever, but turned out to be one of the best. So yeah.
And Oliver.
Well, in 1985, it's probably the year of the most ridiculous action movies. You had Death Wish 3, Invasion USA, Jim Carter, Missing in Action 2, First Blood Part 2, and Commando. It's like, come on, it's like the best year of just nonsense, but great nonsense. But so I don't know. It has to be Death Wish 3, you know, because it's just so over the top and silly, and it was a terrible plot, but with this amazing kind of over the top action, and just seeing this, and say it was that great scene where Charles Bronson's got that massive machine gun just mowing down all these punks. It's great.
I genuinely thought you were going to go for Jim Carter there. The skill of gymnastics, the kill of karate.
Yeah.
Ryan, what about you? Is it going to be Jim Carter? Could we get a vote for Jim Carter?
No, okay. So I'm trying to avoid saying what everyone else has already said, and I kind of was thinking. So, Robocop. When I saw Robocop when I was a kid, and it horrified me. The scene where it's like they put the gun down and it doesn't work out, and then he gets blasted, and that I refused to ever watch the film, I think, after that because it left me so traumatized. Then I did see it again, and I was like, the movie was just this really grim, horrible, like Judge Dredd-like kind of setting. And then there, I was thinking about it there, and I thought, but then there's a scene where like a guy gets covered in toxic waste, and then he emerges as sort of like a mutant thing, and then there's like this crazy sniper rifle, and I thought, well, at that point, I thought that's when it lost that sort of edginess factor to it and became, I think it was Ray Wise that made it so ridiculous in some way. So yeah, is that a valid response? I don't know how everyone else feels about that one.
I mean, it's a valid response. Whether people agree with you or not, it's a completely different thing, but I can see where you're coming from. But villains, Ray Wise is a villain. This is a subject that's close to my heart. I just finished writing a book all about where I interviewed the actors that played some of these great movie villains, your Vernon Wells, your Ronnie Coxes, even Paul McCrane, who plays the character in Robocop who gets melted. So if we go around the table and talk to you guys and find out when it comes to the best villains that have stood up to the likes of Arnie and Stallone and Willis, who immediately comes to mind? Oliver, let's kick things off with you.
See, I could go say, because I've already mentioned Commando before, we could say with Bennett, you know, because he's so funny. He's at the end, he's like, I don't need no gun! And but there's the bit, I think for me, what sums up when growing up was watching his action movies and these actors. I think Frank Langella as Skeletor in Masters of the Universe.
That's a good one.
He steals that movie despite the ridiculous premise. He's treating it like it's theatre, you know, and at the end when he turns like full on solid gold, you know, that suit, like proper disco mode. It's amazing. It's so and Dolph Lundgren's like he's got no, because he's, you know, at that point his acting was you know pretty weak at that point, but. So Frank Langella gets all the lines and steals them all, and it's amazing. So yeah, yeah, Skeletor for me.
Skeletor. Ryan, is it another Frank Langella vote from his memorable appearance in Cutthroat Island, perchance? Or
maybe a bit different. I tried to avoid bringing this movie up because it is my favorite action film, and it would be Hans Gruber from Die Hard.
Of course.
Like I feel like I understand that feels like the generic answer, but like I just don't feel like there's just a villain that's sort of he's so serious and determined and like, you know, so there's something again partially haunting about him, and then yeah, weirdly there's always something so lovable about him as well. Like he's charismatic in a very subdued charisma where I'm kind of like, yeah, I see your point. I get on that. At the same time, I would not piss the guy off in any means. So yeah, and for that to be his name has slipped my mind. Alan Rickman's first screen performance, I believe. Like, you know, talk about hitting the ground running.
And Mr. Rossatron, what would your suggestion be? That was my terrible Alan Rickman.
It took me a second to get what was going on there. I guess, yeah, tough. You know, I could go for weirdly all the alien kind of characters that appeared at that time and silent killer types, but I'm going to go for the Terminator. Like, I know he became a hero, but in that first movie, that kind of really horrifying, unstoppable machine that was represented by, you know, the strongest man in the world at one point, one of the only people who'd won at that, you know, Miss Universe, I don't know how many times, and getting very few lines, but the lines that he does get, like, I'll be back. are just so killer, and then what comes after that, like the destruction of an entire police station, is just it's amazing. And he was kind of horrifying as a kid. Like, that's why I like Terminator 1 so much, and why I don't really like the sequels as much, because he's just such a good bad guy.
And Mr. H, wrapping things up, your best movie villain.
Well, you've all chosen the ones which I had shortlisted, so thanks, I guess. I'll choose someone a little bit out there then, and I'll actually go Dylan from Predator, because you guys have chosen the other ones, so I'll choose a more subdued, deceptive, devious villain. So, you know, Dylan, I think, to be honest. Is
it Dylan's fault? I mean, the CIA did have him pushing too many pencils.
Exactly. I mean, look, you know, his biceps were still bulging, but those pencils, crazy.
Cool. So coming up to the end now, just a couple more rounds to go. Music is a crucial part, whether it's Brad Fiddel's iconic Terminator theme tune, Jerry Goldsmith's brass anthem for Rambo, or even the power anthems like We Fight for Love by Power Station at the end of Commando. What iconic 80s score, or it can be power ballad song, you know, Eye of the Tiger, sums up classic 80s action films for you, starting with Mr. H?
It's got to be, and I love this, it's one of my favourite songs, Push It to the Limits. This is in Scarface. you can't not like that song. You absolutely can't. It's the best. I absolutely love it. So yeah, Push It to the Limits.
Rossatron?
Well, it's tough because that was my choice. I would say if I was going to go score, then for me, I mean, it's anything Basil Polidorus, but Conan. Like what that guy did with that is still to this day the ultimate fantasy score for me. Like you can keep Lord of the Rings, it's amazing. And I'm going to say A View to a Kill for a power ballad by Duran Duran.
That's good.
It represents everything of that era.
Great choice. Ryan?
I'm always going to sit on the Terminator one. I think it's just the build-up. It's kind of like there's something partially like hopeful and inspiring, but also something kind of poignant about it as well. I just think it kind of encapsulates that series altogether.
And the romantic version when they're having sex as well.
Yeah, Jesus.
There's nothing like a sexy Terminator theme to light the passion within you. And Oliver, what do you reckon?
I suppose, you know, as I think Rossatron maybe mentioned it earlier with the sort of burning in the third degree, or maybe Ryan did, but that was probably the song that I would say as one from the 80s. But I think with the soundtrack, it would probably be for me like Jerry Goldsmith with First Blood. It's just one of the greatest scores for that point. And, you know, he kind of kept those themes going, you know, with the sequels. And when they did the fourth one, they brought the music back, and it just works so well. That's one of the great things about those 80s movies when they are brought back with sequels. They often try to bring back the theme tune, but the rest of the score is often a bit drab with these new composers taking over. But, yeah, Jerry Goldsmith and First Blood for me.
Yeah, I think Brian Tyler did the music for the last Rambo film, and essentially it was just one big Jerry Goldsmith homage, which I
can't argue with. I did have another one on my list, which was John Debney's Sudden Death score for the Van Damme movie. It's one of my favourites, that is. But that's a 90s movie, so it's all 80s tonight.
And in terms of like 80s directors, obviously we've talked a lot about films like Terminator and Predator. So I think two names that I think are going to come up a lot in this round are John McTiernan and James Cameron. But the directors that you feel had the most significant impact on the genre and the decade really as a whole. I mean, we might kind of go around in circles on this as everyone just praises these two directors, but I could be wrong. I mean, let's start with you, Ryan. Is there a kind of like a director that for you just kind of encapsulated the decade and just moved it on in a way that no one ever thought possible?
Okay, so I guess everyone's going to say, yeah, as you said, John McTiernan or James Cameron, as they are the two that I have written down. But as I'm assuming, I'm sure more people will have to add to those two, I will try and throw another name in the pot, which I understand, like, he's predominantly known for horror movies, and I wouldn't even say he's necessarily the strongest filmmaker, but I always thought that John Carpenter at least always tried to bring something partially different. I know with recall when he did They Live and Escape from New York, I think at least he tried to kind of create something with something with scale, but again keep it rather intimate at the same time. And may not have pushed it maybe at the same depth, or even in some cases originality as what James Cameron did with something like Terminator, or John McTiernan with Die Hard or Predator. But I always feel like he's someone that sometimes gets a lot of flack, but I feel like he does try to make every movie he makes in somewhat different.
That's a good choice. I'd agree. I'm a big John Carpenter fan myself. Oliver, what do you reckon?
I would. There's two guys who were like really good at the spectacle. I think that was Richard Donner and John McTiernan, because John McTiernan obviously did Predator, but when he went onto CinemaScope with things like Die Hard, you saw how he could really frame those action sequences like Donner can with, we obviously come from Superman and The Omen, but when he did Lethal Weapon series, it would just when there's a massive explosion, he always kind of shoots it so well. But one director I think made the biggest impact for me in terms of getting the violence across was Paul Verhoeven, with things like Robocop and Total Recall, because Total Recall's 1990, so I'm pushing it a little bit. But seeing those people getting gunned down, and like everything was so intense, the camera's really close and it captures everything though, and it's just the editing as well was just so precise. It was just really shocking violence, but with Robocop you've got this kind of huge satire surrounding it, so it kind of often borders into sort of the comic realm. But I think Paul Verhoeven really kind of shook things up a bit with action.
And Rossatron.
Yeah, well, I'm again, all the guys I would have said have come out, but I'm going to go a little bit different, I guess, and say that some of the directors that had the most, impression on the directors that came after the 80s, for me, didn't come from America, but it was guys like John Woo and Jackie Chan, like what they were doing. If you look at the martial arts stuff like Armor of God, Project A, that Chan was doing, it has influenced so many people. And obviously John Woo, I mean, at the time he was doing Better Tomorrow and Bullet to the Head and The Killer. Like, those are some of the greatest action films ever made, especially in terms of set pieces. And what that has done for action cinema, it almost in a way helped kill off a lot of the action movies we're talking about today, and was adopted by American audiences after that. But they were just such good, precise, controlled movies and what they've been able to create was, I can't knock any of that.
And Mr. H, what do you say? Which director made the biggest impact on you?
Guys, the worst being last, because everyone just picks everything. I mean, I've had to. I'm at the bottom of the barrel here.
Don't say John McTiernan.
No, look, I've chosen. I'm completely left field, but no one's actually said Steven Spielberg. And Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark was in '81. And that's a fantastic film. Some of the things which were done in that is, is incredible. I mean, you guys chose, and we touched on James Cameron. James Cameron's influence in the industry speaks for itself, disregarding what he's doing now in his submarine. But Steven Spielberg also, did some absolutely monumental stuff. So because everyone else is chosen, I have to go to Steven Spielberg, I'm afraid.
I suppose there's one director I suppose we haven't mentioned, but people may forget. Maybe like John Glenn, because like the Bond films of the 80s, they had some really impressive action scenes, like License to Kill. We see that petrol tanker go off and explode. It's incredible. So
that's influential.
That was a good thing to end on. Steven Spielberg, young up and comer. I think he's got a promising career ahead of him. Look forward to see what he does next. Last year, I did something in Bristol called Genregeddon Action, and it was like a 12-hour action movie marathon. And I got to show some action films that I feel don't get enough love. And in the lineup was Carl Weathers' Action Jackson, and also Dolph Lundgren and Brandon Lee's Showdown in Little Tokyo, which are two action films that I love that I don't feel enough people talk about. But for you guys, as this is the final round before we wrap up tonight, is there an action film that you would like to tell people to seek out and that you don't feel many people appreciate? Starting with you, Rossatron.
Yeah, there's a few, but I'll try and stick to one, so I'm not taking too many of what people are saying. I'm actually quite a big fan, in terms of it just being a bit of a different movie, of Red Scorpion from 1989.
Oh, I was thinking of that.
Because it's kind of the quintessential Dolph movie in a way, where he's basically topless for like most of the movie, and he is just holding these gigantic guns, but it's in just a location that you didn't really see very much at that time. And looking at a culture, I mean, it's still got the problems that 80s had in terms of looking at other cultures, but they tried to do it, I feel, slightly with a better eye towards looking at that culture, and also it's a half-decent action movie that doesn't really get talked about at all.
Great. Mr. H.
Well, I would say, and it doesn't get that much love, you know, in this day and age, especially from, you know, a younger audience, but go out and watch Conan the Barbarian. You know, I have a lot of younger audience on my channel, and it's something which they absolutely wouldn't have watched. And for them,
Really?
Yeah, honestly, some of the stuff I review and not hate it, because this is going to be released on my channel. So just real quick, I love you guys. But yeah, some of the things you guys
going, that guy's the voice of Darth Vader right there. That James Earl Jones.
Yeah, it does shock me. So I would say go out and watch it, because it's a bit of fun, and it kind of puts Arnold Schwarzenegger in perspective from, you know, what he used to do to what he does now, and yeah, I just think they should. So
great pick, Oliver. How about you?
See, I put a film from the 90s, and it's got to be from the 80s, hasn't it? Can I do one from the 90s? Probably not.
I'll allow it this one time, Oliver.
Okay. Because because the other ones I thought were Dolph movies, and they were like 1990. But as I mentioned earlier, with the soundtrack, one that didn't quite make it in was Sudden Death, the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, which is one of the finest Die Hard clones, where Van Damme doesn't do much fighting in it. You know, he's playing actually more of a dramatic kind of role, and it's the one time I thought where Van Damme actually was doing some good acting in that. I was really, because as with James Cameron, he gets the best out of Arnold, and Peter Hyams, how you like to pronounce it, he got the best out of Van Damme with Time Cop and Sudden Death. And Sudden Death is really the one I sort of go back to a lot, because of its obviously the other performances got a great villain as well, and having this Die Hard style thing in this kind of ice hockey rink, and the whole thing, you know, all explodes at the end, and Van Damme beating up this person dressed as a giant penguin is great. So I would say anyone out there who's not seen Sudden Death, you need to go watch it, because it's superb.
It's a fantastic film. I'm a big fan of Sudden Death, and it's such a shame Powers Booth died last year, because he was wonderful. Ryan, wrapping things up, an underrated action film that people need to seek out.
No pressure then. I was actually trying to think of one from I'm from Northern Ireland, so I was actually trying to think of one from my island, and I thought of a film called Traffin, which is it's a Pierce Brosnan film, and I remember it's one of those ones where it's like it's Irish when a car chase gets abruptly stopped when they get stuck behind a tractor. But then I went and I YouTubed it just to make sure I could remember it, and then I very quickly remembered why nobody remembers it. But if you want like really schlocky, terrible, bad acting from Brosnan and stuff, that's the one to go. But to give my actual answer that I do recommend, it's a film called Straight to Hell, which is like it's like a sort of a really bizarre parody on spaghetti westerns in a way, where it's not really a western, but in fact it actually feels more like a Mad Max movie at times, where it's like these three criminals, and they're trying to escape to Mexico. Their car breaks down, and then they end up in this town where it's all the people that live there are like these cowboys that have like coffee addictions, and they all had sort of like they're carrying espresso machines and stuff around with them, and then all this chaos ensues, and it's just mad, incoherent nonsense. It's just shootout after shootout, but at the same time, fun characters. It's obviously a comedy, and then there's some a bit of emotional depth to it. Add some sort of substance if you want it. But yeah, if you really want to push a really bizarre, strange action movie, that's the one I would go to.
Guys, this has been an awesome dive into the action genre. Before we wrap up, let's just quickly go around the table and tell people where they can find you, both on YouTube and on social media. Mr. H?
You can find me at Mr. H Reviews on Twitter and, bizarrely enough, Instagram, but of course, YouTube, just Mr. H Reviews.
And Rossatron?
Yeah, just Rossatron on YouTube, and Ross Peacock is my Twitter, because that's my actual name, surprisingly, not Rossatron. So, thank you.
God, the mask falls away. Ryan Hollinger, where can people find you?
YouTube.com/Ryan Hollinger, or on Twitter.com/Ryan Hollinger. Convenient to have a name like that.
And finally, Oliver.
We're just putting Oliver Harper into YouTube and you'll find me and my silly mug.
Awesome. I'm Ty Singh. You can find me on Twitter at Timon Singh, and go to Bristol Bad Film Club to see what terrible films I show per month to raise money for local charities. But guys, thank you very much for doing this. This has been wonderful. And everyone go to Kickstarter and back Oliver's project In Search of the Last Action Heroes, and we'll hope to bring you some of the greatest action legends in this film and give you the stories behind some of your favorite action films.